wicked, shockingly evil and vile. Well, that sums it all up. Welcome to the Art of Creepy. That first bit sound familiar? Well, that's because it's the title of a movie about a serial killer I will be talking about today. Yes, Ted Bundy, the most famous serial killer of the world. Next to Jack the Ripper, of course. But yeah, Ted Bundy, he isn't that famous about his murders, more about his charms during the trials, which also were very special for this case, because it was the first televisionized court case of the world basically, and it had to be focused on Ted Bundy, also one of the most charming serial killers, one would say. Before we talk about his case, let's talk a little bit about his history. He was born in 1946 as Theodore Roosevelt Bundy, and because he was basically born out of wedlock, he was raised by his grandparents, who he believed were his true parents, and most everyone in the neighborhood, to keep away the shame because he was born out in wedlock. His mother, he believed, was his sister, and no one's really know for sure who his father is, and there aren't any records, and the mom doesn't even know who his father is. Basically, he was raised by his grandparents, and he only found out in 1968 that his believed to be sister was his real mother, and that might have caused a little bit of damage in his mind to start hating women and start wanting to kill them. He studied firstly to become a political person, so he helped with the rallies, he helped with the local politician to get up at the parties, and after a while he was done studying politics and he wanted to become a law student. He didn't do too well, so he went to a medical law school, but that's what he did. During his time as political student, he met his girlfriend, who was basically the main reason why he was caught, because he was the first one to call on him that she might think that he was the killer. Basically, the first few women were at the local university that he was studying at, and from there he went basically wild and went across 6 states and finding women to murder them. The way he did it, most believe, was by having his arm in a plaster and asking young women to help him with unloading his boat or loading on his boat on his Volkswagen Beetle, a horribly colored one Volkswagen Beetle. And when they would help him and they were out of sight, he would hit him with his plaster arm, and basically then no one knows for sure, but take them, kill them, maybe rape them, and leave their bodies somewhere. And it got almost up to 40 women who went missing and were presumed to be murdered by Ted Bundy. He got caught the first time, basically, because he tried to kidnap a woman, but she was able to escape. During that attempt, he tried to act as a policeman and ordered her to go with her. She didn't really trust it because a policeman is not driving a Volkswagen Beetle, but she went along with it, and when in the car she noticed some weird stuff and was able to escape out of the car. Later the police were stopping him because of the car. They were looking for the Volkswagen Beetle and found murdering kits, rape kits, burglary kit in his car, basically gloves, rope, a tire iron, all those things that make him criminalized, and they took him in, and the woman identified him as the kidnapper. Then he got transferred to somewhere else because they believed he was responsible for the murder of a woman there, which he was, and that's when he did his first escape attempt, which made him, well, he escaped for like a week, but then he was caught because he could not get far away of the prison building. Then he was transferred somewhere else, another prison building, and he was also able to escape that, his second escape. And then he was gone for a long time. He basically went to Florida, was responsible there for the youngest murder victim, a girl of the age of 12, and a few days later raided, attacked 2 sorority buildings and killed and wounded women there. And then he was caught again, and then the whole media circus began. So his court case was the first to be televisionized because it was sensational. This was a man that they had been looking for a few years, because his murdering spree was from 1974 to 1978, so 4 years, and it was across 7 states. Most murderers don't stay in their own state, but he went all across America. Not even 7 states combined, but he went to Washington, Colorado, Florida. Those are like different corners of the US. So that makes it, you know, a very US-wide case. But the case that was going to be televisionized was about the sorority house murders. I can go all in about these murders, how horrifying it was, like beating them, or the fact that he bit one of them and the biting mark was the thing that did him in, basically. But there are so many things about that, or podcasts, movies, or just books, read about it online. But I'm going to talk about the creepy thing about Ted Bundy, and that was the fact that he looked like a normal, charming young man, and that was what he was. Nowadays you wouldn't call him very handsome, but in the 70s he looked handsome. Basically, if he did his hair differently nowadays, he would also be thought to be a handsome man. And by being handsome and having a very charming character, you would say, a lot of women believed he was innocent, which he proclaimed during the case and for most of his prison life, that he was innocent and didn't do these murders. But because this case became a huge media circus, he was able to charm lots of women all across the United States and even across the world. The case was also televisionized in Europe, in England, in Canada, in Asia probably, and Australia. And because of his charming looks and his charming personality, he was able to charm lots of women. In the courtroom you can see a lot of women sitting there, and they were also interviewed, and they all basically said that either they believed he was innocent, or they believed he had done it, and being near him was giving them good feelings. It was a sense of danger what makes them like it, or like going there. And that's basically with all serial killers or school shooters nowadays. Lots of women start falling for these men because the sense of danger is a bit of a turn on for some women. And that's worrisome, because these men can hurt women and also men, and it's just dangerous to fall in love with these men. But you could say that happened before, but Ted Bundy was one of the biggest because, like I said, it was a media circus and women were interviewed and were able to tell with it. He was even in magazines, and women were cutting out articles and keeping them above their bed because he was a charming young man and people believed he was innocent. And that was also in the courtroom. He made such a ridiculous circus of it. He fired his own lawyers because they didn't do what he wanted them to do. He started to present himself. He became the lawyer, basically. And he didn't do well. The judge would say that he did, but no, he wasn't. He was a medicore law student at a medicore school. So to say that he was an amazing lawyer is basically a lie, and that's with most killers, serial killers. If they start representing themselves in the court, you can basically say they're guilty. That's it. And with him doing that, he looked really adorable in some of his lawyer outfits. The one with the bow was really ridiculous to look at, but he didn't do really well. And basically, like I said, the thing that did him in was his teeth, because he bit one of the victims in the sorority houses, and he had apparently very weird crooked teeth. And there was a chip missing in one of his front teeth, and basically they were able to identify or solidify that the bite marks were his bite marks, that it was the same. He did it basically, and that was it. He was convicted basically on the teeth mark, and he went to prison. In prison, he still claimed he was innocent until 1986. Only then he confessed to around 28 or 30 murders, and in 1989 he was basically on the electric chair and died. Good thing, because that's also one of the amazing things. The other states he murdered in, they didn't believe in the death sentence, but he was sentenced in Florida and they still had the death sentence. So if he was convicted somewhere else, he probably would just have spent all his life in prison, but because he did the most horrible crime in Florida, his last crime, he was convicted in Florida and got the death sentence. So yay for Florida, for once. So he confessed to around 30 murders, but people believe there are more. Some believe there are about hundreds of women that he murdered. But that's what all the women that they found and believed he did, for now. They were all dumped at the same place. They all had a bit of the same trademarks. He once did 2 murders on one day at the same place, and dumped them later both in one of the mountains. And they found more traces of bodies there than he confessed to. And like I said, he did 7 states. 7 states were very spread far apart. So men believed that during his travels from Colorado to Florida or to Washington, that he probably did some murders along the way. So there are probably more than those 30 in probably more than 7 states. And that's just a thing. If women that went missing during the 70s, some believe that Ted Bundy did them. Though there's no connection to Ted Bundy, they still believe he did it because he might have crossed that path during his travels. And that's one of the really creepy things is that young, like I said, the youngest was 12, the oldest was like mid 30s, so his range was very big. So every woman in that between 12 and 30, maybe 40, that went missing in during the 70s in the United States could have been a victim of Ted Bundy. And there are lots of women that were missing who still haven't been found, or no one knows what happened to them. And to blame it all on Ted Bundy is ridiculous. It's possible, but it's also a bit ridiculous because there are other murderers going around, and especially during the 70s, they were a horrible time. Lots of things happened during the 70s. Lots of serial killers started in the 70s because it was a time that everyone was still a little bit open, and houses didn't lock their front doors at day or at night even, because everyone felt safe. And basically after the 70s and the 80s, people started to be more scared about everything and started locking everything and installing alarms because of all the shit that happened during the 70s. But the creepiest thing about Ted Bundy isn't the murderers, though some people believe that it is, but there are more horrible serial killers out there. I will talk about them later probably, but the creepiest thing about Ted Bundy, he was basically the first one to be called a serial killer. And a serial killer is someone who kills more than 3 people with a certain amount of time between them. So if someone kills 3 people in one day, he's just a murderer and not a serial murderer. It has to happen like 7 days between each murder, then you are a serial killer. And well, he did like 30 or hundreds in 4 years time. So yeah, he's the first one to be officially called a serial murderer. And also the thing in the 70s was, everyone believed that a criminal murderer was someone who looked like that. Like, they didn't take care of themselves, they looked horrible, they were ugly, they were mean to other people. But Ted Bundy wasn't none of that. He was a charming man, he was friendly, he helped other people, he was working on a suicide prevention line. Not the thing that you would suspect a serial killer to work on, but he had worked on it. And he was just a charming man. He had a girlfriend. He married a woman who was not the girlfriend, but he married a woman during his court case. It's also really very weird, but he did that. He was charming. He had all these women, you know, charmed. Because he didn't look like the typical serial killer during that time. Now we know better. But in the 70s, no one could have really believed he was a serial killer because he was not the typical person to be one. And that's one of the creepiest things, that if people had realized that sooner, maybe more people would have been convicted for murders before Ted Bundy. Because they had this vision in the mind that only horrible people could be murderers and the charming people could not. And basically that's a psychopath, and Ted Bundy was one. And that was also why he was so charming. He might not have been intelligent at school, but he had some form of intelligence that made him able to charm people. Basically, a psychopath does not have empathy. They cannot see when a person is happy or when they're sad. He doesn't feel that like most people can feel. They can read the room, basically. But by learning that if someone is frowning or just body language that someone is sad, he was able to portray that to someone. Oh, I know you're sad, so I have to be, you know, help you because you're sad. Or when someone is happy, someone is smiling, you can read the body language and know, oh, I have to be happy for this person. And that's also a way of charming people and basically not showing you're a psychopath. And not every psychopath is a murderer or a serial murderer. There are, you know, therapy that can help them, or they can just, you know, read the room and be good people. But because they have no empathy, they also cannot see pain. They don't, basically, if I were to strangle a kitten, I will feel horrible. But psychopaths don't feel that horribleness. They want to feel things, so they start doing horrible things to see if they feel something. And Ted Bundy was basically that. He did so much horrible things, probably just to see if he would feel empathy. And he didn't. Or he did, and it gave him a rush. So he tried to do it more to get that rush back. And that's just horrible. I can go hours about this. But just like I said, the creepiest thing about Ted Bundy is basically that no one really knew what a murderer would look like. He didn't fit in the standardized idea of a murderer, so people believed he was innocent, and he was able to proclaim he was innocent for so long that a lot of people weren't sure about it. But the most beautiful thing is that when he was electrocuted on the chair, there were lots of people standing outside like, "Fry! Fry, Bundy, fry!" And it was like 10 years later, and there were people who didn't even know someone who was murdered by Ted Bundy. They just wanted to go with it. It was like a party for some people. It brought people together, you could say. And it's, weird, beautiful thing. And there are lots of stories about people, almost being kidnapped by Ted Bundy. Lots of women during the 70s. But the thing about serial killers is that they have a certain profile. And that's also seen with Ted Bundy. Serial killers won't go outside of their race or the specific gender or age. Well, race of most of course, because all the women Ted Bundy had murdered were white women, and mostly with brown hair. The age was mostly 20s, but there were some offshoots like the 12-year-old or the 30-year-old, but mostly women with brown hair, and the hair split at the middle. And people believe that was because of a former girlfriend, or the girlfriend that he met during his first 2 murders, the one who basically did him in. But Ted Bundy is it's a good person to study, because he basically changed how people perceived serial killers. They weren't that ugly old man living in a cabin. No, they were your neighbors now. They were your colleagues, because that was what he was. A neighbor, a good-looking, charming neighbor, or the colleague who helped prevent suicide rates, but he still murdered them. So I wouldn't say he was the worst serial killer there is. There are horrific killers with horrific murders who did it in more horrific way than Ted Bundy did. But he was basically the first to be called a serial killer. He was first to, change the way of how serial killers are perceived. And that's a good thing, but also just a really creepy thing to have happened. Even though it happened in the 70s, I believe we still can learn something from it, and that's just basically don't trust anyone, even the charming neighbor or your boyfriend. Just don't trust anyone, because anyone can be a serial killer if they don't get enough therapy. Just, if someone's acting strange, just go to therapy. Find someone to talk to, please. Everyone can be a murderer. But Ted Bundy was a pioneer for the true crime murderinos, as my favorite murder would say, which is a podcast I will highly recommend. But I would say Ted Bundy was a pioneer for the true crime women who started being more invested in true crime, because he was a charming man, and women started to look at what he did, reading articles, and it laid a foundation for further, interest in true crime. So in a way, Ted Bundy was a horrible man, like the movie title said, extremely wicked, shockingly evil and vile. He was that, but he was also a pioneer for changing people's perspective of serial killers and true crime, and for that we thank him. But he rot in hell forever, which he probably is, if you believe in hell. If there ain't hell, he's right. I hope he's reincarnated into a little ant and scratched almost every single life he has been reincarnated as a small little ant. Let's hope that. Either that or burning in hell. Whatever you believe in. But I'm going to sign off for today, because that's enough rambling about the Bundy. He doesn't receive any more fame than this, because he is just a horrible monster. Yes, that's it. Bye! If you liked this video, please like and subscribe down below. Support me on Patreon or do a one-time donation on Ko-Fi. Follow my social media. This channel is still growing and learning, and I'd love to have you all on this journey with me. Bye!